The mid-1800s, just after the Civil War here in America, wasn't the safest time to be raising a family. This was especially true in and around southwest Missouri near Springfield and surrounding counties. Without proper law enforcement, it was pretty much a free-for-all when it came to crime. Innocent families were at the mercy of pretty much all sorts of criminals and crimes, many of which YouTube won't let me mention without getting the video flagged, but you can use your imagination. One particular type of crime that was particularly done was something called bushwhacking. Thugs would hide behind bushes or trees and wait for folks to come along and then rob them at gunpoint, or worse. Stores were being robbed, families were getting assaulted and killed, and some of the men in the area were getting sick of it. One of those men was a man named Nat Kinney. In 1883, he decided to hold a meeting to form a group to take on the problems that the law either would not, or could not solve. In nearby Taney County, over 40 murders was reported during the years of 1865 and 1885, and not a single suspect was ever convicted. Enough was enough, and the men knew that it was time to do something about it. They met in 1883 at Snaps Bald, which is a large hill located just north of Kirbyville, Missouri. The hill was a large grassy area that had no trees. It was just a large open area, but all around the hill was covered in trees, hence the name, the baldknobbers. The first meeting was a group of 13 men, which included Nat Kinney, the man who organized the meeting, as well as James DeLong, Alonzo Prather, Yale Everett, James Rice, T.W. Phillips, James Van Zandt, Pat Fickle, Galba Branson, J. Brown, Charles Groom, James Polk McHaffey, and possibly Ben Price. The original idea for the group was to eliminate criminals and to make them pay for their crimes. However, it wasn't long before the power of the group started to go to the men's heads. They went from simply hanging killers and thieves, to burning down and killing the entire families of anyone who dared cross them in any way. This could be political rivals, anyone who had different spiritual beliefs, or even if they simply wanted to own the property that their rivals owned. They also killed anyone who they believed who cheated on their spouses, or anyone who they thought were abusive to their partners, and especially anyone who they found out was not heterosexual. At first, when the group banded together, the general population of the area was supportive of what the guys were doing. As their actions soon rivaled that of the persons who they were condemning, the public opinion soon changed tides. It wasn't long until there was a group being formed called the Anti-Baldknobbers. Really original, isn't it? Anywho, this group was represented by a 19-year-old young man named Andy Cogburn. Cogburn hated Kinney. He disagreed with everything that Kinney stood for and loved to publicly debate and harass Kinney. It wasn't a surprise to anyone when Mr. Cogburn ended up dead after being shot by Nat Kinney outside of the church that Mr. Kinney was getting ready to preach at. Everyone knew that Kinney was the head of the Baldknobbers, so naturally, no charges was brought against him. The town was too afraid of him. He and his men wouldn't be able to get by with their actions forever though. In 1886, after gaining national attention and notoriety for their crimes, Missouri Governor John Marmaduke sent the General J.C. Jameson to Forsyth to investigate the situation. When the general arrived, he recommended to Kinney that an official dissolution of the Baldknobbers would be in the best interest of the county. That next day a formal dissolution ceremony was held in the town square, where they publicly disbanded the Taney County chapter of the group. There were however other chapters. Neighboring counties such as Christian, Douglas, Greene, and Stone also had their own versions of the Baldknobbers, each who had their own rules and their own versions of the masks, who many say resemble that of the Ku Klux Klan, a hate group who targeted any race who wasn't of white descent, or some would even say looked a little bit like the band Slipknot. Either way, these masks were not something anyone would want to see outside their windows at night, which was almost always when they attacked. They would almost always burn down the homes of those they either horsewhipped or killed. The Christian County chapter was led by Dave Walker. They held meetings at a large cave on the edge of the Walkers' own land. Dave had a 17-year-old son named Billy who many said was especially brutal. Chadwick, Missouri, where they lived, bordered a railroad, which meant that there was saloons and brothels. This faction of the baldknobbers would go after anyone who patronized those establishments and brutalized anyone who they deemed morally corrupt or a drunkard. They would burn down every saloon and brothel they could find, and was even more brutal in their ways than that of the original band of 13 baldknobbers. William Edens was a young man who strongly disapproved of the group and their beliefs, and would publicly criticize them. After being warned several times and even having been given a brutal late-night beating, the Taney County chapter led by the Walkers had had enough. The night of March 11, 1887, the group met at the cave to discuss disbanding. However, that night new members were brought in. Many of the new members, along with Walker's son Billy, were enraged by some of the statements William Edens had made about the band. As the meeting finished, the younger, more hot-headed members of the group decided to go home the long way, towards the Edens cabin. David Walker begged them not to go, but his son Billy and several others were determined to shut William's mouth for good. When the men discovered that Edens was not home, they continued up the road to the cabin of James and Elizabeth Edens, William's parents. William Edens and his sick wife, Emma, were staying the night. So were James and Elizabeth's daughter Melvina, who was sick with the measles, Melvina's husband, Charles Green, and the Green children ages 3 years and 3 months. The baldknobbers busted in the windows and splintered in the doors of the small cabin, spraying shotgun blasts as they entered. During the shotgun fire, William Edens and Charles Green were killed, James Edens seriously wounded from an axe blow to the head, and baldknobbers William Walker and John Matthews shot. The horrifying screams of the women and children led neighbors to the scene of the massacre. Charles Green's father was the first to arrive and see what had happened, and soon, Dave Walker had showed up to try to stop his son and his followers from following through with their evil plan. He was too late. Simply being seen at the site at the time of the crime was enough to seal Dave's fate, along with his son Billy and a couple of their followers who had killed the family. The trial was being covered nationally, so getting out of it was not likely this time. The father and son and the other two eventually hung from the hangman's noose for what had happened that tragic night. It wasn't long before long-awaited justice found Nat Kinney. In August 1888, a farmer named Billy Miles entered a store where Kinney was at and killed him instantly by shooting him. He immediately stepped outside the store and surrendered to the local police, and ironically claimed self-defense just as Kinney had when he shot Andy Cockburn. I guess it's true what they say, what goes around comes around. After so much negative national attention and so many deaths, the baldknobbers' reign of terror was about to come to an end. After a botched hanging where one of the men were hung and his rope broke and he ended up being rehung until he died, and a shootout in a public area between former members of the group and the man who had shot Kinney, in which Billy Miles escaped and was never seen again. The remaining members all decided that their days as vigilantes were finally over, and they all went their separate ways. Crazy story, wasn't it? With crime getting as bad as it is today and the laws not doing anything about it most of the time, it makes you wonder if maybe history may repeat itself. Let's hope not. If you like today's story, you can help us a lot by liking, subscribing and sharing our content. We don't get ad revenue yet, so everything we make is just in merchandise sales, so if you go to the links below, please check out of shirts, mugs and other merch. We appreciate our viewers and your comments more than you could ever know. Thank you so much for viewing. Till next time.